Let's begin, but before we dive in, a special request. Subscribe to the channel and leave a like, and tell me, where did you find me? It's always a joy to know who's on the other side. The whispers started the moment Eleanor Hartley stepped through the gilded doors of Buckingham Palace's grand ballroom. At 40 years old and unmarried, she had become society's favourite target, a spinster to be mocked at every turn. Her dove-grey silk gown was a deliberate choice against the sea of pastel debutantes who fluttered nervously around the dance floor. Poor Miss Hartley, the matrons would say, voices dripping with false sympathy. Such a shame she never secured a husband. Eleanor had stopped pretending she didn't hear. She knew precisely what kept gentlemen away. Her refusal to diminish herself, to trade her independence and intellect for managing some gentleman's household while he frittered away her inheritance. The November evening of 1883 was bitterly cold outside, but inside hundreds of candles blazed in crystal chandeliers. Eleanor moved through the crowd with practiced grace, heading toward her friend, Lady Margaret Pemberton. "Eleanor, darling, there you are." Lady Margaret appeared at her elbow. "I was afraid you'd changed your mind. Tedious and filled with people who measure worth by marital status rather than character?" Eleanor offered a wry smile. "Yes, I'm quite familiar with the atmosphere." As the evening wore on, the comments multiplied. Two young debutantes giggled behind their fans as Eleanor passed. "Imagine being 40 and unwed," one whispered. "I'd rather die than face such humiliation." Then everything changed. A ripple of reaction moved through the ballroom like wind across wheat fields. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Dancers stumbled in their steps. Every head turned toward the main entrance. Alexander Thornfield, the Duke of Ashford, stood at the entrance, and the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Tall, powerfully built, with dark hair shot through with silver at the temples and pale grey eyes that seemed to look through people and find them wanting. He commanded absolute attention. Eleanor had never formally met the Duke, though she knew of him as everyone did. The war hero, the ruthless businessman, the scarred recluse who rarely attended social functions. His presence tonight was therefore all the more remarkable. Eleanor watched as his pale grey eyes swept the ballroom methodically, searching for something specific. Then, to her absolute shock, those cold eyes locked onto hers across the expanse of glittering nobility. For a moment she couldn't breathe. Then he moved, cutting through the crowd with purposeful strides, walking directly toward her. "Good Lord," Lady Margaret breathed. "He's coming this way. Eleanor, do you know the Duke?" "Never," Eleanor managed, her mind racing. He stopped directly in front of her, and the crowd fell into absolute silence. Up close, the Duke was even more imposing. Not just his height and build, but something in his presence that commanded submission. "Miss Eleanor Hartley," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle, though it carried easily. "I have been searching for an opportunity to speak with you for quite some time." Eleanor's mind raced. "Your Grace, I'm afraid you have me at a disadvantage. I cannot imagine what business you might have with me." Something flickered in those cold eyes. Amusement. "Can you not? Then permit me to remedy your confusion." And to the absolute astonishment of everyone watching, the Duke of Ashford, one of the most powerful men in England, lowered himself to one knee before her. The ballroom erupted in gasps. "Miss Hartley," the Duke said, his voice carrying to every corner, "I am here to ask for your hand in marriage." Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. This couldn't be happening. Marriage? The Duke of Ashford was proposing to her? Here, now, in front of the entire court? "I realize this is unexpected," he continued, still kneeling, "and I do not expect an immediate answer. But I wished to make my intentions clear and public so that there could be no doubt about the seriousness of my regard." A memory surfaced. 3 years ago, a sick child found shivering in an alley. She had taken the girl in, nursed her through fever. Lady Charlotte Thornfield, the Duke's niece. Could that be the reason for this incomprehensible proposal? "Your Grace," Eleanor's voice was steadier than she felt, "I am astonished. This is most irregular." "I have never been particularly concerned with regularity," he said, and was that a hint of a smile? "Miss Hartley, I hope you will grant me the opportunity to call upon you to explain myself more fully." Every eye in the ballroom was fixed on them. Eleanor could feel the weight of judgment pressing down. She searched his eyes for mockery or cruelty, but found only patience and something that seemed almost like respect. "You may call upon me, Your Grace," she said clearly, "though I warn you that I am not a woman easily persuaded, and I will have many questions." "I would expect nothing less," he said, warmth in his voice now. A woman who asks no questions either lacks intelligence or has been taught to suppress it. I have reason to believe you possess the former in abundance. He rose to his feet with fluid grace and offered her a bow. I shall call upon you tomorrow afternoon. It is convenient, Eleanor said, though her schedule had ceased to matter the moment he knelt. The Duke walked back through the crowd, leaving Eleanor standing in the epicenter of the season's greatest scandal. Eleanor, what on earth just happened? Lady Margaret's voice shook. How do you know the Duke? I once helped his niece, Eleanor said quietly, aware every word would be repeated. 3 years ago she was ill, I provided care. But the whispers had already begun. She had entrapped him somehow, used witchcraft or blackmail. The explanations grew more outlandish, because society could not conceive that a man might see value in a 40-year-old unmarried woman. The Duke's carriage arrived precisely at 2 o'clock the following afternoon. Eleanor watched from her window as her modest street transformed into a spectacle of gawking neighbors. When the Duke descended, tall and imposing, whispers ran through the crowd. Mrs. Davies, Eleanor's housekeeper, practically vibrated with excitement opening the door. Your Grace, such an honor. Tea would be welcome, thank you, the Duke said with surprising gentleness. Eleanor gestured to the sitting room. Her small space was filled with books on every surface, the room of a scholar, not a woman of fashion. The Duke's pale eyes traveled over the spines. You have Aurelius in the original Latin, and Plato, Homer, Plutarch. This is an impressive collection, Miss Hartley. I believe knowledge is never wasted, Eleanor said, choosing a chair opposite rather than beside him. Though society disagrees when that knowledge resides in a female mind. Society is often wrong about a great many things, he said. May I speak plainly, Miss Hartley? I would prefer it. A genuine smile crossed his face, transforming it from austere to almost warm. You saved my niece's life 3 years ago. Charlotte would have died if you had not found her, taken her in and nursed her through fever, despite not knowing who she was. Any decent person would have done the same, Eleanor said quietly. Few actually do when faced with the inconvenience and expense, the Duke corrected. When I finally tracked Charlotte to your home, you asked for nothing. Not money, not favor, not recognition. You asked only that I love her and care for her properly. Eleanor remembered. Has she thrived? She has. Genuine warmth in his voice now. Charlotte lives with me at Ashford House. She speaks of you often, Miss Hartley. You are her hero. Abandoned? Eleanor's voice sharpened. How could her family... Charlotte was born with a twisted foot and slight spinal curvature, the Duke said bluntly. Her parents considered her an embarrassment. When she fell ill, servants left her in London, assuming she would die and save everyone the trouble of caring for a defective child. Horror swept through Eleanor. That's monstrous. She was 5 years old. Yes, the Duke agreed quietly. I cannot give her what she needs most. A mother figure who understands what it means to be dismissed by society. Someone with the strength to teach her how to thrive despite the world's cruelty. Understanding began to dawn. You wish to marry me to provide Charlotte with a mother? No, he said, leaning forward, his grey eyes intense. If that were my only goal, I could hire governesses. I wish to marry you, Miss Hartley, because in 3 years of searching, I have found no woman who possesses the qualities I saw in you. Intelligence without pretension, kindness without expectation of reward, strength of character that neither seeks society's approval nor crumbles under its disapproval. These are rare qualities, and I have spent too many years suffering fools to pretend I don't recognize them when I see them. Eleanor sat back, overwhelmed. Your Grace, you don't know me. One brief meeting. I have made it my business to know you, he interrupted gently. I have spoken with your students' parents, with Lady Margaret, with your housekeeper. I have read your letters to the Times about education reform. I have even attended one of your lectures, though I sat in the back. For 3 years, Miss Hartley, I have been attempting to determine if my first impression was accurate, and every piece of information confirmed what I already knew. You are extraordinary. No one had ever called her extraordinary. Eleanor's hands trembled slightly. I don't know what to say. This is overwhelming. You are afraid, he said softly. Not of me, but of losing yourself. You have built a life of independence and purpose, and you fear marriage would require you to surrender that. Am I correct? She decided on honesty. Yes, I have refused marriage for 20 years because every man wanted me to become smaller, quieter, less intellectual, less myself. I will not trade my freedom for a title, no matter how impressive. To her surprise, he laughed, a rusty sound. Miss Hartley, if I wanted a traditional wife, I could have married 20 times over. I want a partner, not an ornament. I want someone who will challenge me when I'm wrong, support me when I'm right, and have the intelligence to know the difference. I want you." The words hung in the air, more intimate than a kiss. Eleanor's breath caught. She wanted to believe him, wanted it with fierce longing, but years of disappointment had taught her caution. "I need time," she said finally. "Your Grace, yesterday you knelt before me in front of the entire court. My quiet life is over, regardless of my answer." "I know," genuine regret in his voice. "I apologize. I made the proposal public to protect you from speculation, but I recognize I may have exposed you to other cruelties. If you refuse me, I will make it equally public that the decision was yours, and you have my complete respect." Mrs. Davies entered with tea, and they fell silent. When she left, Eleanor poured, grateful for the familiar ritual. "Tell me about yourself," she said finally. "Not your title or accomplishments. Tell me who you are, because if I am to consider this, I need to understand the man behind the proposal." He took the cup, and she noticed his scarred hands. "I am Alexander Thornfield, and I am not a good man by society's standards. I have killed men in war, many men, and their faces still haunt my dreams. I am difficult to please and quick to anger. I have little patience for stupidity or cruelty. I am wealthy through hard work, not inheritance." He paused, continued. "I am 45 years old. I have never married because I never met anyone I could imagine tolerating for a lifetime. I have had mistresses. I won't insult your intelligence by pretending otherwise. But those relationships ended years ago. I want more now. I want intellectual companionship. I want someone who understands that vulnerability is not weakness. I want to build something with someone, Miss Hartley. A partnership, a legacy that matters." Eleanor leaned forward, captivated. "What kind of legacy? Charlotte will never marry. Society sees her disability as a flaw, so I want to ensure she has purpose beyond depending on relatives' charity. I've been funding schools for working-class children because I believe education is the only true path out of poverty. I want to leave the world better than I found it, Miss Hartley, and I think you want the same thing. I think we could do it together." She set down her cup carefully. "You have been investigating me quite thoroughly." "Yes," he admitted without shame. "I needed to know if you were truly the woman I believed you to be." "And your conclusion?" "That it might be both gift and insult," he said with startling honesty. "A gift because it would give you resources to do your work on a larger scale. An insult because it requires you to enter a world that has treated you abominably and bind yourself to a man whose very presence makes people uncomfortable." He gestured to his scarred face. "I am not pleasant to look at. I am called the Duke of Ice. I am respected for my wealth and feared for my temper, but I am not liked. It doesn't trouble you that people fear you. Fear is honest," he said. "It is the insincere flattery I find intolerable. At least when people fear me, I know where I stand." "That's rather bleak." "I am a rather bleak man," he said simply. "War does that. I do not expect to be happy, Miss Hartley. I expect to be useful. And I think you understand that better than most." He was right. She had stopped expecting happiness years ago. She had settled for purpose. "I need time," she repeated. "1 week to decide. Is that reasonable?" "More than reasonable," he said, rising. "Miss Hartley, regardless of your decision, meeting you 3 years ago changed something in me. You reminded me that there are still good people in the world. That is a rare gift." As she watched him leave, Eleanor found herself wondering if perhaps impossibly this could work, if two damaged people, both rejected by society, could build something together that neither could achieve alone. The week that followed was the strangest of Eleanor's life. Newspapers had gone mad with speculation. Some portrayed her as a scheming seductress. Others suggested the Duke had gone mad. A few praised him for looking beyond youth and beauty to find a woman of character. 3 days into the week, Charlotte showed up at Eleanor's door. The girl was beautiful despite her twisted foot and slight spinal curve. She had dark curls and the Duke's grey eyes, but where his were cold, hers sparkled with warmth. "Miss Hartley," she cried, throwing her arms around Eleanor's waist. "Uncle Alex says you might say yes. Please say yes. I've told him all about you, how you read to me and made me soup, and didn't look at me like I was broken. Please, please say yes." Eleanor knelt to Charlotte's level. "Sweetheart, this is complicated. Marriage is not something to rush into." "Uncle Alex says you're the smartest woman in London," Charlotte said seriously, "and the bravest. He says you don't pretend to be something you're not just to make people comfortable. He says you're the only woman he's ever met who made him want to be better." Eleanor's breath caught. "He said that?" "Yes," Charlotte nodded. "He talks about you sometimes. He says you understood Charlotte's value when even her own parents didn't, and that showed him what real strength looked like. He says you are the only woman who ever made him believe that goodness and intelligence could exist in the same person. Eleanor had to look away, overwhelmed by such raw honesty from a man who presented such a cold face to the world. Your uncle is complicated, Eleanor managed. He's sad, Charlotte said with devastating clarity. He has nightmares about the war. Sometimes I hear him crying at night. He's lonely, Miss Hartley, even though he pretends he likes being alone. And I think you're lonely too. Maybe you could be lonely together, except then you wouldn't be lonely anymore. That evening, Eleanor sat staring into the fire, thinking about loneliness, about purpose, about the life she had built and the life she might build. She thought about Alexander and his scarred face and haunted eyes. She thought about Charlotte, who needed a mother. She thought about the schools he was funding, the resources that could amplify her own work. And she thought about the alternative, continuing her current life, growing older alone, always wondering if she had been too afraid to take a chance on something extraordinary. By the end of the week, Eleanor knew her answer. She sent a note. Your Grace, I will accept your proposal. We should discuss terms. E. Hartley. Alexander arrived within an hour, something eager flickering in his pale eyes that made Eleanor's heart do something unprecedented. Terms, she said without preamble once they were seated. If we are to marry, Your Grace, I need certain assurances. Alexander, he corrected gently. If you're to be my wife, use my given name, at least in private. Alexander, she tested the name, found it fit him. I will not give up my work. I must continue teaching, continue my writing, continue to have purpose. Agreed, he said without hesitation. In fact, I was hoping you might consider expanding your work. With the Duchy's resources, you could open a proper school rather than tutoring individuals. You could publish under your own name. You could become a voice for educational reform with the protection of the Ashford name. Eleanor blinked, surprised. You would truly support that, even though society will think you mad. Society already thinks me mad, he pointed out dryly. Your work matters, Eleanor. Why would I want to stop you from doing something that matters? She felt something warm unfurl in her chest at his use of her given name. I will not be a conventional duchess. I will likely offend people. I will probably cause scandals. Good, he said simply. Conventional duchesses are insufferably boring. Despite herself, Eleanor smiled. What about children? I'm 40, Alexander. The chances are slim and the risk significant. His expression grew serious. I have Charlotte, who will be our daughter in all ways that matter. I do not need heirs of my body. This marriage is not about producing heirs, Eleanor. It's about partnership. She studied him, looking for deception, but found only sincerity. You realize how unusual you are? Most men of my station are fools who care more about bloodlines than happiness, he said bluntly. Respect, Eleanor repeated. Is that all this is? He leaned forward, and she noticed the silver threading his dark hair, the fine lines around his eyes. No, he said quietly. It began there, but became something more. These 3 years, watching you from a distance, learning about your work. Eleanor, I have come to admire you in ways I didn't think possible. Your intelligence, yes, but also your kindness that expects nothing in return, your strength that doesn't require you to make others weak, your refusal to be diminished by a society that cannot see your value. I am drawn to you in ways I have never experienced. Drawn, she echoed, heart hammering. That's not the same as love. No, he agreed, but it might become love, given time. Is that not worth exploring? We are both beyond foolish romantic fantasies. We understand that the deepest connections grow from respect and shared purpose. He was right. The desperate, all-consuming love of poets seemed improbable at her age. But partnership, respect, genuine affection built on shared values, those seemed precious. I will marry you, she said formally. But Alexander, I am terrified. Not of you, but of losing myself. He reached across the space and took her hand. Warm, calloused, surprisingly gentle. I am terrified too, he admitted. I have lived alone so long that sharing my life feels impossible. I don't know how to be a husband. I will likely fail regularly. But I promise you this, I will never ask you to be less than you are. If I do, you have my permission to tell me I'm being an ass and correct me immediately. Despite the seriousness, Eleanor laughed. You give me permission to call you an ass. I insist upon it, he said solemnly, though his grey eyes held warmth. I need someone who will tell me truth without fear. Can you be that person? I can, Eleanor said, and meant it. He looked into her eyes, and she saw vulnerability beneath the cold exterior. "Eleanor, we will make mistakes. This will be difficult. Society will be cruel, but I believe we can build something worthwhile together. Do you believe that?" She looked into his face and made her choice. "Yes," she said softly. "I believe we can try." The wedding was arranged for 3 weeks later. They married at the small church near Eleanor's home with only close friends present. Charlotte served as flower girl, beaming throughout. Lady Margaret cried tears of happiness mixed with worry, and Alexander looked at Eleanor as though she were precious when he slipped the ring onto her finger and promised to honor and cherish her for all their days. That night, in the vast bedroom that was now hers, connected to Alexander's through a door that could be locked from either side, Eleanor stood at the window looking out at Mayfair. This was her life now. Duchess of Ashford. Wife to a man she barely knew but was beginning to understand. A soft knock on the connecting door made her turn. "Come in," she called. Alexander entered, still fully dressed, looking uncertain. "I wanted to ensure you were comfortable, and to say that I have no expectations tonight, or any night until you wish it. This marriage will proceed at whatever pace you set, Eleanor." She saw then that he was as nervous as she was. This powerful duke was worried about frightening his new wife. The realization touched something deep in her chest. "Thank you," she said softly. "Alexander, I think we should be honest about this aspect too. I am not inexperienced. I had a brief relationship in my 20s before I realized he wanted to change me. But it has been many years and I am nervous." "As am I," he admitted, vulnerability flashing across his face. "I told you I had mistresses, but those were transactions, not intimacy. I have never shared a bed with someone I actually respected, someone whose opinion of me mattered." They stood looking at each other, two middle-aged people trying to navigate a marriage that defied conventions, and Eleanor made a decision. "Would you stay?" she asked. Not for that, not yet, but would you stay and talk? I find I'm nervous sleeping in this enormous house alone, and I think I would sleep better knowing you were nearby." Relief flooded his face. "I would like that very much." They talked late into the night, sitting by the fire like old friends. He told her about the war, about the nightmares, about watching men die. She told him about her parents' deaths, about the loneliness of building a life alone. When they finally slept, it was in separate beds but the same room, and Eleanor found comfort in the sound of his breathing, proof that she was no longer alone in the darkness. The scandal exploded exactly 1 week after the wedding. Anonymous letters began circulating, claiming Eleanor had been Alexander's mistress for years, that she had illegitimate children hidden away, that she had used blackmail to force the marriage. Eleanor discovered the extent when she attended her first major social event as the Duchess of Ashford. The moment she entered on Alexander's arm, she felt the atmosphere shift. Where she expected curiosity, she found cold judgment and open hostility. Conversations stopped. Women turned their backs. Men looked at her with contempt. "What is happening?" she whispered to Alexander, whose expression had gone dangerously cold. "Stay here," he said quietly, voice like ice. "I will discover what poison has been spread." Lady Margaret rushed over, face pale. "Eleanor, you need to leave. Someone has spread terrible rumors. They're saying you were his mistress, that you have illegitimate children, that you trapped him through blackmail." Eleanor felt struck. The cruelty took her breath away, not just the lies but the calculated malice behind them. "Who?" she asked, voice steadier than she felt. "Lady Constance," Margaret said grimly. "She's been furious since the Duke proposed to you instead of Victoria." Eleanor's first instinct was to flee, but then she thought about her students, about Charlotte watching to see how her new mother would handle cruelty. If she fled now, she would be teaching Charlotte that lies could win. "No," Eleanor said firmly. "I will not leave. I have done nothing wrong." Alexander returned, expression murderous. "We're leaving," he said shortly. "No," Eleanor repeated, placing her hand on his arm. She could feel coiled rage in him. "Alexander, if we leave, they win. We stay and we face this directly." "Eleanor," his voice strained, "they are destroying your reputation with malicious lies." "My reputation has been doubtful for 20 years, she reminded him. "I'm not fragile, and running from cruelty only encourages it. We stay, we hold our heads high, and we demonstrate that their lies have no power over us." Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, then admiration, then fierce protectiveness. "You're certain?" "I'm terrified," she admitted quietly. "But I'm certain." He squeezed her hand briefly, then raised his voice to carry across the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I might have your attention." The ballroom gradually quieted, faces turning toward them. "It has come to my attention," Alexander continued in a voice that cut like a blade, "that malicious rumors are circulating about my wife and our marriage. I will address these once." His pale eyes swept the crowd. "The Duchess of Ashford is a woman of impeccable character who has devoted her life to education and betterment of others. She saved my niece's life 3 years ago, asking for nothing in return. She agreed to marry me despite knowing it would subject her to exactly this kind of vicious scrutiny. Anyone who believes these lies either doesn't know her at all or has chosen falsehoods because they cannot stomach the truth that a woman of 40 can be brilliant, accomplished, and desirable enough to attract genuine admiration." The silence was absolute. "Furthermore," Alexander's voice dropped dangerously, "I have made inquiries and discovered the source. Lady Constance Whitmore, you have exactly one opportunity to retract your lies publicly and apologize to my wife. If you do not, I will use every resource at my disposal to ensure that you and your daughter are never welcomed in respectable society again. I will expose every debt your late husband left, every dubious investment you have made, every questionable relationship your daughter has pursued. Your choice, madam." Lady Constance had gone white. Finally, self-preservation won. I apologize, Your Grace, she stammered. "I spoke in haste. I meant no real harm." "You meant every word," Eleanor said quietly, her voice carrying. "You meant to destroy me, because you could not accept that your idea of what makes a woman valuable is limited and wrong. But I accept your apology, Lady Constance, not because you deserve forgiveness, but because I refuse to allow your cruelty to diminish me." She turned to address the room. "I know many of you think my marriage strange, perhaps even scandalous. A 40-year-old spinster and a scarred recluse. We don't fit society's notions of a proper couple. But I would rather be strange and authentic than conventional and miserable. I would rather be myself and lonely than false and accepted, and I am fortunate to have found a partner who feels the same way." Eleanor took Alexander's arm, standing straight. "Now, if you'll excuse us, I believe we've provided enough entertainment." They walked toward the exit, and Eleanor was acutely aware of every eye following. But then, surprisingly, there was slow clapping. Lady Margaret was applauding. Lord Pemberton joined her, then others. Not many, but enough. In the carriage ride home, Eleanor finally allowed herself to shake. The adrenaline drained away, leaving her exhausted. Alexander pulled her against his side without a word, and she let herself lean into his solid warmth. "That was the bravest thing I've ever witnessed," he said quietly, "and I've watched men charge into enemy fire." "I don't feel brave," Eleanor admitted. "I feel like I'm going to be sick." "Courage isn't the absence of fear," he said. "It's moving forward despite it. You didn't just defend yourself tonight, Eleanor. You defended every woman who has ever been judged by narrow standards or dismissed because she doesn't fit society's mold. You were magnificent." She lifted her head to look at him in the dim light. "Were you serious about ruining Lady Constance if she hadn't apologized?" "Absolutely," he said without hesitation. "I told you I protect what's mine, Eleanor. You are my wife now. Anyone who attacks you attacks me, and I do not tolerate attacks." There was something both comforting and slightly terrifying about his fierce protectiveness. After Charlotte was tucked into bed, Eleanor and Alexander found themselves in the library. He poured them both brandy, and they sat in companionable silence. "This won't be the last attack," Eleanor said finally. "We've challenged too many assumptions." "I know," Alexander agreed, "but we'll face them together. Eleanor, I don't expect you to fight my battles alone. Tonight happened because I wasn't clear enough when I announced our engagement. You can't control what people think," Eleanor said, "and I don't need you to defend me constantly. I've spent 20 years defending myself. I'm rather good at it." "You shouldn't have to," he said, anger in his voice. "You should be able to exist without constantly proving your worth. It's exhausting and it's wrong, and He struggled with words. "I want to make it better. I want to create a space where you can breathe freely." Eleanor moved to sit beside him, closer than they had yet been. "You're already doing that," she said softly. "This library you created for me, the study, your defense tonight, your acceptance of my work. Alexander, you're giving me space to be myself in ways I never thought possible in a marriage. That's more than enough." He looked at her with those pale grey eyes, and she saw layers there. Loneliness and longing, strength and surprising vulnerability. "May I kiss you?" he asked, the question respectful but edged with desire. Eleanor's heart kicked against her ribs. They had shared polite kisses at their wedding, brief brushes of lips for tradition, but this was different, a question of genuine intimacy. "Yes," she said, and the word came out breathier than intended. He leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to change her mind, and when his lips met hers it was gentle but purposeful. Eleanor let herself sink into the kiss, into the unfamiliar warmth of being desired by someone who actually knew her. His hand came up to cup her face with surprising tenderness, and she felt something inside her, some last wall of defense, begin to crack. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Alexander rested his forehead against her. "I'm falling in love with you," he admitted quietly. "I didn't expect it to happen so quickly, but I'm falling in love with your courage and your compassion, and the way you face the world with such determined honesty. I thought I should tell you." Eleanor's eyes stung with tears she refused to shed. "I think I might be falling too," she whispered back, "though I'm terrified of it." "So am I," he said, "but perhaps we can be terrified together." They sat there by the fire, holding each other like shelter against storms, and Eleanor thought that perhaps this was what love looked like for people like them, not the desperate passion of youth, but something steadier and deeper, built on respect and shared battles, and the courage to be vulnerable despite knowing how much it could hurt. 5 years passed, like turning pages, and the legacy Eleanor and Alexander built together exceeded their hopes. The schools grew from 3 to 15, educating over 500 working-class girls annually. Eleanor published 2 more books, gradually shifting public opinion. She became a sought-after speaker and was appointed to a government commission, one of the first women to serve in such capacity. Alexander continued his business ventures, but increasingly focused on social reform, better working conditions, housing improvements, support for orphanages and hospitals. He discovered that having purpose beyond profit was far more satisfying than mere wealth accumulation. Charlotte, now 13, was thriving. Under Eleanor's tutelage, she had become remarkably educated, fluent in Latin and Greek, well-versed in mathematics and sciences. She had also developed a talent for writing and had begun publishing essays. The 3 of them had become a true family. They took working holidays to the countryside. They hosted salons where reformers, writers, and scientists gathered. They built a life of purpose and meaning together. Eleanor's relationship with Alexander had deepened into the kind of partnership she had once thought impossible, genuine equality between 2 strong-willed people who challenged and supported each other in turn. On the 5th anniversary of their wedding, they attended the graduation ceremony at the newest school Eleanor had founded, watching as 30 working-class girls received certificates. One of the graduates, a 16-year-old named Sarah Thompson, gave a speech that brought tears to Eleanor's eyes. "5 years ago," Sarah said, "I could not read or write. I worked 14 hours a day in a factory. I thought that was all my life would ever be. But then someone told me about a school where a duchess herself was teaching." Sarah looked directly at Eleanor. "But she did care. She taught me to read, and reading opened worlds I never knew existed. She taught me that being born poor doesn't mean I have to die poor, that my circumstances don't define my worth. I start work next week as a clerk in a law office, a position I could never have dreamed of 5 years ago. And someday I hope to open a school of my own, to pass on what Her Grace taught me, because that's what the Duchess of Ashford does. She believes in people that society has written off." The applause was thunderous. This was what made every criticism, every attack worthwhile. These girls whose lives had been changed, who would go on to change other lives in turn. That evening, Eleanor and Alexander sat in their library, still their favorite room. 5 years, Eleanor mused. "Sometimes it feels like a lifetime, and sometimes like we married only yesterday. Time is strange like that," Alexander agreed, "though I can hardly remember what my life was like before you." "I do," Eleanor said softly. "I see glimpses of him sometimes when you're tired, but I also see how far you've come. Alexander, when I met you, you were so guarded, so determined not to need anyone. Now look at you, surrounded by people whose lives you've touched. You're not the Duke of Ice anymore." "What am I instead?" he asked. Eleanor considered. "You're the Duke of Fire, still intimidating, still fierce when necessary, but warm at your core, burning with purpose and passion rather than cold isolation." He smiled. "I like that better, though I suspect I only became fire because you kindled the spark." "Eleanor, these 5 years have been the best of my life." "Nor am I," Eleanor said. "But I agree. Despite all the challenges, these have been my best years too, because they've been years of purpose and partnership, years of actually making a difference. They sat in comfortable silence. Eleanor found herself reflecting on the impossible journey that had brought her here, from isolated spinster to Duchess of Ashford, from defensive outsider to confident advocate, from lonely independence to profound partnership. "Do you have regrets?" Alexander asked eventually. Eleanor considered seriously. "I regret that we had to face such cruelty. I regret that society made our happiness so difficult. I regret the energy we've had to spend defending ourselves. But do I regret marrying you? Not for a moment. My life before was safe, but it was also small, limited. With you, I've been able to expand my work exponentially. But more than that, I've experienced genuine intimacy and partnership. I've learned that vulnerability doesn't have to mean weakness. So no, Alexander, I have no regrets about marrying you." He came to kneel beside her chair, taking her hands in his scarred ones. "Neither do I. Eleanor Thornfield, Duchess of Ashford, former spinster and current love of my life. You have made me happier than I ever thought possible. You have given me purpose beyond wealth and status. You have shown me that strength and compassion can coexist. You have made me want to be worthy of you." Eleanor cupped his face in her hands, tracing the familiar lines. "You don't fall short," she said firmly. "You are exactly who you're meant to be, flawed and human and doing your best. And Alexander, you've given me just as much. You've provided the resources that let me expand my work. You've defended me when I needed defending. You've loved me, not despite my age or my unconventional nature, but because of who I am. That's the greatest gift anyone has ever given me." They kissed then, deep and tender, a reaffirmation of all they had built together. "To 5 more years," she whispered. "To 50 more years," he corrected with gentle humor. "Remember, I come from long-lived stock. You're stuck with me for decades yet." "Promise?" Eleanor asked. "Promise," he said. "I am not leaving you, Eleanor Thornfield. We have too much work left to do, too many lives to change, too many years of partnership and love ahead of us." The epilogue to Eleanor and Alexander's story would be written not in months or years, but in generations. Their schools grew from 15 to over 50 across England, creating a network that lifted thousands of working-class girls out of poverty. Many of those former students became teachers themselves, spreading Eleanor's educational philosophy. Charlotte grew into a formidable woman in her own right, becoming one of the first female physicians in England and specializing in treating children with disabilities. She never married, but she lived a rich life full of purpose, caring for patients other doctors dismissed as hopeless. The reforms Alexander championed, better working conditions, fair wages, worker safety standards, gradually became more widely accepted. Other industrialists, seeing that ethical treatment of workers could coexist with profitability, began implementing similar changes. Eleanor's books became foundational texts in the growing movement for women's education and suffrage. Though she didn't live to see women gain the vote in England, her writings influenced the activists who eventually achieved that goal. But perhaps the most important legacy was the simplest. They had lived their truth. Two people who didn't fit society's narrow molds had refused to be diminished or hidden away. They had built a marriage based on mutual respect and genuine partnership. They had demonstrated that unconventional could be successful, that choosing one's own path could lead to happiness and fulfillment. In their final years together, both living well into their 80s, as Alexander had predicted, Eleanor and Alexander would sit in their beloved library surrounded by books and memories. They would hold hands like young lovers, though their hands were gnarled with age. They would tell stories to their grandnieces and grandnephews about the shocking proposal that started it all, about the battles they fought together, about the work they had done and the lives they had touched. When Alexander died first, at 87, Eleanor grieved deeply but without regret. They had had over 40 years together, 40 years of partnership and purpose and profound connection. She lived 3 more years, working almost until the end, and her final words were about him, "I'm coming, love, wait for me." They were buried together in the garden at Ashford House, under a simple stone that Eleanor had specified in her will. It read, "Alexander and Eleanor Thornfield, Duke and Duchess of Ashford. They chose partnership over convention, courage over comfort, and love over fear." And generations later, when people visited that garden and read that stone, they remembered the scandalous marriage that had shocked Victorian society. They remembered the spinster and the scarred duke who had defied expectations and built something beautiful together. They remembered that sometimes the most important thing you could do was be authentically yourself and find someone who loved you for it. The end.